Wells Institute. And I guess you've got a PowerPoint thingy.
I do. Mic check. As I'm setting up the thing we need to know about municipal budgets is, of course, it's about dollars and cents. So I'm going to walk you through a few. And that's so budgets are about dollars and cents, and they're about getting projectors warmed up so that they do this. But behind the dollars and cents are choices. Choices that politicians make. So last year when our city council chose not to increase property taxes, that cost about $60 million, which means that this year we're $60 million deeper in the hole than we were last year. So I want to just run through a few numbers because I think it's important. Within the next 5 or 10 minutes, everyone in this room will be a stronger expert in terms of the numbers on housing and homelessness than anyone on the city council, so you'll be able to tell all of them exactly what needs to be told. The first set of numbers I want to talk about are about the scale of housing need in Toronto. And this chart is showing the Toronto's affordable housing wait list. And now the wait list is anyone who's crazy enough to actually sign up for affordable housing in the city. And I say crazy because at the moment the list is, you can't actually see it. I wonder if there's a way we can get the bottom of the slide. There's actually there's over 81,000 households on the wait list as of the end of October. And what that means, because that month, the month of October, 282 households were housed, what it actually means is that it's about a 24-year wait for somebody who signs up in October. One of the stunning things about the wait list, and this is a number that the Budget Committee needs to understand when they think about should we be spending money on the Affordable Housing Office, should we be spending money on, should be going backwards, I think. Oops, sorry. We don't know what we're doing here. But you know what? We're having a good time. Every month since Mayor Rob Ford has taken office, every month when the Toronto Affordable Housing wait list comes out, it sets a new all-time record. And that has to be a number that Toronto Council should be concerned about. And what this shows is the steady increase. These are actually quarterly increases in the affordable housing wait list. When you think about housing, I try to think of different ways of understanding what's happening in terms of housing and homelessness in Toronto, and this is a blast from the past. I don't know if other people remember Gary Larson's great cartoon of the Crisis Clinic, which is on fire and about to go down a waterfall. That's pretty much what's happening. And here's a few more numbers you should know about affordable housing. The federal government has decided in the last couple of years, in order to avoid a US-style meltdown in our mortgage market, to make it harder for people to access mortgages, which means people who want to go into home ownership, if you have the money to go into home ownership, it's harder to do that now, which means more pressure on the rental market. Toronto's rental vacancy rate has dropped and continues to drop, and will almost certainly drop in the next couple of weeks when we get the next set of numbers, which means there are fewer units available for people. Average market rents continue to go up and up and up. There's 5,532 vacant rental units in all of the City of Toronto, and the entire so-called rental universe in the City of Toronto. So when someone like Mayor Ford says, let's put all the people on the waiting list into vacant units and give the landlord subsidies, well, that's a great idea, except there's only 5,532 vacant rental units, according to Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, in the entire City of Toronto, and there's 81,000 households on the wait list, so there's going to be a big overcrowding problem if we think that that's going to be a solution. We, of course, have rapidly rising energy and utility costs. City Council is looking at increasing water charges by 9%. They don't call these tax increases, it's something else. But energy costs are consistently every month rising at 10, 15, 20% on an annual basis. We're hearing of tenant households are being evicted because they can't afford to pay their energy bills. As bad as it is in terms of there only being 5,532 vacant rental units in the private rental sector in all of Toronto, is actually shrinking. That there has been some new construction, but overall there's been more demolition and conversion. So we actually have this year 1,353 fewer rental units in Toronto than we had last year. And remember, the feds are saying you can't go into ownership because we don't want to have a US-style mortgage meltdown, so more pressure on the rental market, fewer rental units. This is a crisis. 81% of all the housing in Toronto is 25 years or older. And housing is like people, it's like me. As I get older, my knees start to go and other things happen. The same with housing, 25 years and older. Why does Toronto Community Housing have such a big repair bill? Because a lot of it's older housing stock. Some of it wasn't all that well built in the first place. It's old. Toronto's 1,000 high-rise towers. These are the concrete slab high-rises scattered all across the city, from Etobicoke to Scarborough and from Toronto all the way up to North York. It's a tremendous resource, but it's also a place where some of the poorest Torontonians are stuck in some of the worst housing in the city. Most of them are privately owned buildings. They're ripe for redevelopment, not just fixing up the building, but actually fixing up the neighborhood, creating opportunities, and so on. The previous mayor began to see the potential of that. Current mayor, and not so much. And of course, we continue to have a problem in terms of way too many people who are crowded into shelters, seniors and youth, families, single people in shelters and on the streets. And we've heard already about the Toronto Community Housing Company plans to sell off 700 plus affordable homes at a time when we're facing. And as Phil mentioned, as part of the core services review, there was a brilliant proposal that one of the best things we could do for the City of Toronto is shut down the Affordable Housing Office and stop developing new affordable housing in Toronto, because God knows we don't need any more affordable housing. That waiting list is just apparently a figment of somebody's imagination. So what I want to do is actually take you through the shelter support and housing administration budget, because unfortunately budgets are about numbers, and when you want to sit down and debate your city councillor about numbers, you need to know. So I'm going to very quickly walk you through what was in last year's budget, and that way on Monday you can have a sense, you can immediately, as I do, open the new budget with a giddy sense of anticipation and jump into the numbers, and you'll know exactly what to look for. There's two things you need to know about Toronto's budget. They always have two sets of numbers, gross numbers and net numbers. Now, gross sounds gross, but it actually doesn't refer to sick or whatever. It refers to the fact that it's the big number, the overall spending number. So overall, Toronto has a municipal budget that's about $9 billion and something. Big budget. That's the gross budget. The amount of money that property taxpayers pay is about $3 billion or so. That's called the net budget. So more or less, it's not entirely accurate, but more or less, the gross number is the overall amount of money that's being spent, and the net number is the amount that property taxpayers are paying of that amount. So, and this is for all of shelter support and housing. So it pays for the homelessness shelters, it pays for affordable housing, support for social housing, pays for Phil's project and everything else. In 2010, the overall gross budget was $921 million, net taxpayers paying $259. Next year, a slight decrease. This is actually current year budget, $917. They cut a little bit of money out of the budget, and the net. But last year they were projecting that this year they'd need 922, and next year 926, just to stay even, and that the amount that property taxpayers would have to pay is this amount. But there's two other things you need to know about a Toronto municipal budget when it comes to shelter support and housing, because there's a big difference between the amount property taxpayers are paying and the gross amount. You may say, well, who's paying for the rest of it? And one of the answers is that it's actually our very nice Prime Minister in Ottawa, Mr. Harper, and our very nice Premier, Mr. McGuinty, and they're sort of paying for stuff. So the federal government is actually paying $187 million, or was in 2010. It's actually shrinking, as you can see. The federal contribution is going down and down and down. Ontario is also, well, it's kind of a little bit more flat. But the federal government and the Ontario government pay a huge share. They pay a big chunk. In fact, together they pay much more than property taxpayers pay. So remember that as we continue our happy little romp through the budget, because the bad news from Ottawa, this is for the federal government, and they don't have a budget, the federal government. They have what they call spending estimates, but it's a budget, and it lists all the spending. And this year's spending estimates for their housing investments, last year the federal government spent overall $3.1 billion on housing. This year they're spending 1.9, so just a little bit less than $2 billion. That's a 39% cut, but look at what they're cutting. They're cutting their repair budget. This is the program to pay for the 25-year-old housing that is in bad state of repair, Toronto community housing, things like that. Their national federal repair budget last year was $674 million, this year $37 million. 94% cut in housing repairs. This AHI is the Affordable Housing Initiative. It's the federal affordable housing program that runs jointly with the province. It's going from 452 to 16. It's a 97% cut. Federal government refers to this as a scheduled termination of programs, which is their way of saying they're cutting substantially. The assisted housing program is a social housing program that pays for the ongoing operation of a lot of housing, including all the Toronto community housing stock and a lot of other co-op and non-profit housing. 5% cut this year. So the federal government is cutting money, and that has bad news for Toronto's budget because, as I just mentioned to you, a big chunk of Toronto's housing spending relies on the feds. It gets